And all right, Paul, floor is yours. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight your video. Everybody have Paul spotlighted? Did that pull up Paul for everybody?
Seems to have. And now he's trying to screen share. And now I see a PowerPoint with a hefty bag on it.
So Jamie, I am looking for that green border to put around the presentation.
Remember, it's under Share Advanced.
For some reason, it's
under the Advanced tab.
I think I just need to move my mouse. I went back to that.
Go to stop share and then pull up the little arrow and go to advanced options. When you open the share screen tab.
I hear them, but it just.
Thank you, Jamie.
You bet. All right, I'm going to mute everybody but Paul.
All right, guys. So I'm really excited to give this presentation. Last year, I was the breeder of the year, and we'll talk about that more later. But what it really did for me was it allowed me to really do a lot of power fish keeping, if you will. Okay, because most people, you have a couple tanks, you keep a couple species, and you have them for a year, maybe you move them out. With all the tanks that I had, I was moving fish in and out it seemed like every month or two. So I developed this presentation to basically go over a couple of the things that I have found out that I thought was like the most important things that I learned over that whole year. So the key to the slides is any of the text that you see is in that orange color. Okay, that is something that's really a priority for me. That's something very important. So when we go down the list of all the things that we're going to see, we're going to start here with choosing fish and establishing the breeding pairs. Now, the biggest thing that I see people doing, and I really wish this were different, is they buy fish, they come home, and then I see a post or somebody will ask me and they'll say, hey, I was at the pet shop, I bought this fish, now what do I do with it? And they have no idea what they have. And they don't realize that it's going to grow 3 times the size of everything they own and eat most of it, okay? But the reason why it's a really big concern is that when you go through the quarantine process, you're not going to know for sure if your fish is what I consider as just acting fishy, okay? Different species they're going to act different in an aquarium. Some are going to want to swim at the top, some at the bottom, some in the middle. Very few times is your fish ever going to need to swim upside down. And you need to know that your sick fish needs help, okay? But you need to know what their colors and their fin shape, because when you go to select these fish, you need to be able to determine if that's a good fish or not. Because I know, like with the Munsters, I know that she is their niece, but it is very difficult to go from a Herman Munster to a Lily, okay? You don't go from this to this in a couple generations. It never gets better, okay? So if you start with poor stock, it's only going to get worse, okay? The only way, and let me paraphrase or change that a little bit. The only way it would get better is if you did some extreme breeding and really did some line breeding. You might be able to bring some more color out or something like that. But generally speaking, for the average breeder, it's going to get worse. Now, the sources of fish that I found to be the best were the local breeders. It was one of the things I absolutely just love about the Raleigh Aquarium Society, and that's why I cannot wait to get back to meetings. I got more fish, but they were quality fish, and that's probably the most important part, is that they were quality. Many of the local fish stores, you can get some good fish, kind of hit or miss. Because of quarantine, I've been exploring online options, and I've been absolutely amazed at what I've been able to get. There's a couple pictures later in the presentation to show some of the neat species, but the downside with getting online is it just costs more by the time you do the shipping, and it if you're looking for premium fish, it's going to cost you. One source though that I think gets overlooked is some of the larger box stores like the PetSmarts and the Petcos. Some of their fish, if you know what you're looking for the color and the shape of the fins and how they're acting, you can get some really good fish from Petco or PetSmart or some of the other larger box stores. So when I go to look for getting pairs, my goal is to acquire as many as possible. It's much faster than piecing the colony together over months, okay? Because you'll be looking for a male here and a female there and trying to get what you can. If you can get a bunch of them, get as many as you can. Plus, you're only going to have to go through one quarantine cycle. Because something to keep in mind, every time you bring a new fish in, that fish needs to go through quarantine. So why not just do it all at one time? And plus, you know the history of that individual fish or the group of fish, rather than trying to say, I got that fish from Thomas and that one was from Richard and this one was from Neil, and you're not sure. So once you get all the fish, you know, like the egg layers and mouth brooders, if you're going to grow them out because they're small, you're buying fry or they're unsexable, 6 is the minimum that I would get. Okay, I've had people offer me 3 or 4. I really don't want that. I want more. For me, 7 to 9 is my preferred. I do have colonies where I have 12, 14, 18 fish in it to get the ones that I wanted for the colors or the pattern that I particularly wanted. The more you have, the better off your breeding is going to be. If they're adults, then you can go in and pick out one male and one female and take it home, and it's possible they breed. Unfortunately, sometimes they hate each other. Okay, it's the equivalent of somebody saying, okay, you're in your senior year of college and I'm just going to put you two together and now you're going to live happily ever after. Okay, let the fish choose who they want to spawn with, and the degree of difficulty goes way down. Okay, they know what they're doing and they know who they like and they don't. Okay, if I'm able to select males and females, a lot of times I'll get 3 pairs. And every once in a while you get lucky. Like last year, I had 3 pairs of German blue rams. All of them were spawning on the same cycle. So every couple of weeks, I would have 3 spawns within a day and a half of each other. So sometimes you just get lucky. Live bears is a little simpler. If I had my choice, though, I would go with 1 male to 3 females, simply because the males are just ravenous and they will chase those poor little girls all day and all night. But if you get if at all you get the chance, multiple bloodlines is still the greatest way to go. So if you can get, let's say we're talking about the egg layers and you're going to get 6 from this group and 6 from another person, I would still get as many as you can. Okay, but anytime you can introduce new blood to your colony, then you're going to have that much greater looking fish. The absolute most important thing, if you were going to pay attention to any one part of my presentation tonight, I think quarantining is the absolute greatest thing that you can do for your fish room. I know we're all sick of quarantine. I hate the word too now, okay? 6 months ago, I was excited about the word, talking with other fish people. I'm like, oh yeah, I quarantine. Oh yeah, you don't? Oh, you should. Let me look down my nose at you. Now I hate the word, okay? But you're just gonna, basically you just want to put them someplace away from the rest of your fish, okay? I don't know enough about all of the different diseases and all the sicknesses that are out there. I can't treat them, and many of them, even if you do, you can't treat it, or it's cost preventative to spend $60 on medication for a $6 fish. Okay, it just doesn't always work out. But I do know the cost of salt and medication at the very beginning, when that fish is not sick, or potentially just in the beginning of it, is much cheaper. So it's easier for me to prevent it. I always think of it as duckweed. If you have 16 aquariums and 1 aquarium has duckweed, how many aquariums have duckweed? Yes, all 16 of them have duckweed, okay? So as I go through the quarantine process, you're going to realize this is really just trying to mitigate problems before they happen. but things may still spread in your fish room no matter how many times you clean your nets and wash your buckets and stuff like that. This is just preventative. So my basic setup, these are my absolute favorite right here. I really like these. The size is absolutely fantastic. I really like the lockable lids. That way I don't have to worry about dropping something in or contamination like from the bubbles. As you can see in the picture, I have I have 3 quarantine tanks right next to each other. And with the lids on it, it prevents bubbles and cross-contamination from the tanks. I know the tanks are close, but I don't have a lot of room. It's the best I have, so I'm just going to have to work with it. I use the clear tubs. That didn't work. But down on the side here, you can see where I've marked off. Basically, I took a gallon milk jug. I put in 1 gallon of water, let it put a mark on it, and I did that for 6 gallons. It is so much easier to do that in the beginning and mark this in 1 gallon segments when you want to go to do a 50% water change, or if you want to calculate how much medication you're going to put in, or let's say you're using salt and you have to put more salt in, but you just removed 2 out of 6 gallons. Oh my goodness, how much more salt do you need to put in? It's a lot easier to calculate all that when you know exactly how much has been taken out. You absolutely have to have filtration in here. There's the whole idea of a quarantine tank is it's nice and simple. There's no substrate, so you have no biological filtration. Generally, in the very beginning, I don't have any plants in there, so the only thing in there is the sponge filter. I keep extra sponges. I usually keep them stored behind my Hamburg Matten filters in other tanks. I always try to make sure I have several filters ready to go. As you can see right here, there is a terracotta pot, and that has a heater in it. Not all species that I put in quarantine get heaters. Depends on the species. It depends on what the time of year it is, because my room runs colder in the winter, stuff like that. I promise you, though, if you do not use a terracotta pot and you try to stick a sponge or a heater suction cup on the side of your plastic tub, it will stay for a day or 2 or 3, and on the 4th day, you will burn a hole through the bottom of your tub. I know this is fact. Trust me, okay? Use the terracotta pots. They're your friend. But the best part of using additional terracotta pots is they provide a lot of line of sight breaks. So one of the things that you absolutely need to do during this quarantine process is you need to relax the fish. Remember, they've gone from a wholesaler or through a distributor, or they've multiple steps in the chain. They're stressed out. This is their relaxation time, okay? And that's why, if you can, you need to put them in a low traffic area that doesn't have a lot of noise or just doesn't have a lot of foot traffic around it, okay? And the last thing to keep in mind with my quarantine setups is don't put anything in there that cannot be disinfected, or you're going to be ready to just throw it away. In the example here on the picture, I've got some live plants in there. Those plants were from a tank that I had excess amount of, I think it was frog bit, and I threw it in there just to have the live plants, knowing after quarantine it's going to be thrown out. Now, I do my quarantines for 30 days. The most important thing during that whole process, though, is observation. It does you no good to medicate fish if you don't know what they look like before you medicated them, or if they're reacting. Some fish, no matter how healthy they are, I mean, medication is tough on fish. And when you have medication, it stresses them, okay? You need to be able to tell once you put that medication in if your fish are stressed or not, so you know if you need to remove it. If I notice any fish, and I'm going to use the example of ick. So if a fish in my tank gets ick, I treat it for ick, and once I've determined that he's done with ick and he is healthy, I start the 30-day quarantine process all over again, okay? So if a fish got sick, it's not uncommon for that fish to be in there for 45 or 60 days. Do not, and I repeat this, do not ever get in a hurry to throw your fish in your community tank until you have quarantined them and you are happy to say they're healthy, okay? You're going to perform your water changes once a week, unless you have an overstock situation. Every once in a while, you know, depending on the size tub you have, you may have more fish in there than you really want. In that particular case, you might have to do a partial water change midweek. When I am done with my quarantine process, this is what I use most often: hydrogen peroxide. I take all of the equipment outside. I will spray it with hydrogen peroxide. I will, the tub, you know, I'll wash out with Dawn dishwashing detergent. I have used diluted bleach, but I got to tell you, it is my least favorite thing to use. It's fantastic for what it does, but if you don't get it dried out, or if it stays anything, the problems you can have with diluted bleach is immeasurable. Okay, you can really hurt your fish. I really try not to bring it anywhere near my fish room, and that includes putting it in my quarantine tubs or just cleaning them out. So if I have a choice to leave it sit outside on the patio for a couple days in the bright sunlight, I would prefer to do that. Spray it with some hydrogen peroxide, wash everything out. Now this is the next thing. This is a good habit to get into no matter what. And even if you're working in clean tanks and you're going to go from tank to tank, at the end of your day, wash out your nets, wash out all the buckets that you used, and let everything completely dry. Every once in a while, put it outside, let it get some sunlight, and it just works for me. That's just how I do it. So I get a fish in day one. Most of my tubs, because of the size, I'll fill it up with water, I'll dechlorinate it, and I'm just going to feed the fish whatever that species standard is. If it's a Plecostomus, then, you know, Pleco food, that kind of stuff. Okay, do not overfeed in quarantine. Not only because you have a small volume of water, and in that small volume, you don't want the water to become polluted real fast. But if the fish is having a difficult time passing anything, you want them to be as comfortable as possible. So if you're going to feed the fish, less is more. Okay. So the beginning of the second week, I'm going to do a 75% water change. A lot of people will recognize this if you've ever watched anything from Corey from Aquarium Co-op. This is kind of the 3 meds that he uses a lot. Now I'm going to back up my presentation a little bit because I want to point out, let's see, that I've worked here with Dr. I don't know if anybody here went to the March presentation we had, but Dr. Ashley Manuel was a really excellent speaker, and the fish vet, if you will, here in Raleigh. And her and I have worked through this to come up with a really good program. So this is not just me saying this, this is her listening and me telling her what I was planning on doing and how I do it, and her approving it and making tweaks to it. So that's what you're seeing right now. So the beginning of week 2, I'm going to do a 75% water change, and I'm going to dose these 3 medications in accordance with the water volume that I'm using, whether it be 5 gallons. At this point, when I'm doing this, the difference between 5 and 6 gallons really doesn't make a difference. Okay, and I still continue to feed as I normally would. At the end of that week, beginning of the 3rd week, I do a 50% water change, because now I'm starting to I take out half that medication. A lot of that medication is also starting to reach the end of its life. It's not really as potent anymore. And now I start dosing with salt. Anywhere between 1 to 3 teaspoons of salt per gallon is what I use. I've used this on Corey's and the catfish, and I just don't have problems with it. So, but that I usually dose like this on a lower amount. Getting towards the end of week 4, 50% water change, I'm still feeding as normal. And if the fish look good at this point, then I have no problem moving them around in my fish room. This is why it's really important to really understand what your fish is supposed to look like and how it is supposed to be acting. Because even if you got to day 31, but the fish didn't look like it was acting fishy, if you will, and being exactly what that species should be acting, you need to keep it in quarantine until you feel completely confident that that fish is healthy. One of the other things that I really came across over the last year was water quality. And probably some of my favorite tanks are my breeding tanks that only have a pair in it. You get a 10-gallon aquarium with 2 small fish in it. It's really nice because you don't really have to worry about it as much. The bio load is so low, it's appropriate for the filters. The filtration capacity is something else that you're going to have to take into account. I have 16 aquariums. All of them have some version of a Hamburg Matten filter installed. That is my #1 go-to. I like the Hamburg Matten filter primarily because I can do stuff behind it that is not going to be seen when I'm looking in the tank. So if I want to add a heater, I can put it behind the Hamburg Matten filter and you can't see it. If I want to put extra things that I'm going to talk about in a minute for the water parameters, it's back there. The other thing about water quality is plants. I become a true believer in plants, and I am not a plant guy. I'm not. But I know how important they are, and I try to keep live plants in every single aquarium that I have. I use a lot of Java moss, Java fern, Subwasser tang. I use crypts in different tanks. The problem I have with plants is most of my tanks do not have a thick enough substrate to handle rooted plants. It's been very common because I've had to shuffle tanks around that I've had an aquarium that I was growing out a Tanganyikan cichlid, and I had a pH of 8.5, and because I had to move it, by the end of that day, that tank now has fish in it that require a 6.2 pH, and I've made that change by removing everything. I have no problem shuffling tanks around. So planted or rooted plants rather do not work well for me. Feeding schedule and amount, I try to keep them pretty consistent. Most of my tanks I try to feed twice a day. I like to go out on Friday and Saturday night. So if I'm going to miss Friday and Saturday night is usually the nights the fish do not get fed, and I never feel guilty about it. Being that they are in well taken care of planted aquariums, there's always something in there for them to nibble on, some microorganisms, some algae or something. The fish in our tanks get fed very well compared to what they are out in the wild. So they can go a couple days without eating. Probably the #1 thing for water maintenance though is consistency. Okay, I change my tanks religiously once a week. Okay, if I have a large bioload, for example, right now I have a 10-gallon aquarium that is just full of L144 blue-eye bristlenose. That tank has been getting some water changes twice a week, okay, because it's got a huge bioload on it. I know they need to be in a larger tank. I just don't have one available for them right now, so I just have to do extra work for them. But the consistent maintenance, okay, and then the substrate. The majority of my tanks have a little bit of substrate. Whether it is small pea gravel, whether it is as simple as just 2 cups of sand in it, I always try to have something that is an additional place for beneficial bacteria to cling to. It also is going to come in handy in a moment when we get to talking about the breeder boxes and what I do to help the fry when I put them in there. Probably the biggest thing though that I've done that has really helped me having all of these different tanks is by creating a maintenance-free water parameters. And by that, I'm on Raleigh water, and it's pretty high 6s, right around 7 is kind of, 6.87 is kind of where it's really wanting to sit as far as pH. So many of my tanks have a little bag of aragonite sand behind the Hamburg Matten filter. I use oyster shells with some species. If I've got like golden mystery snails or something like that in there, I'll throw an oyster shell back there. I use a lot of egg shells. So whenever I boil an egg, a lot of times I will take that egg shell and I will put it in the aquarium just for the calcium. The calcium from those eggs, the eggshells, will stay in the tank a long time. It takes a long time for egg to dissolve. But the way I do it is I really believe that the aquarium takes out of it what it needs. If it needs more calcium, it's going to take more calcium. If it's fine on calcium, the shell just lasts that much longer. For some of my species that are soft water, I like to use a lot of driftwood. I like to use a lot of botanicals. Every winter, I go out and I get a just garbage bag full of oak leaves. I bring them home, I boil them, and I let them dry out, and I keep them in a Tupperware container as I need them throughout the year. Then I have oak leaves, which are absolutely great for spawning pairs to hide in. It's great for the fry to hide in, and it also is an awesome source of microorganisms. The other thing that I like to use is substrate. So some of my tanks, I might throw in aragonite sand on the bottom of the tank, like a handful or two, just enough. Some of them, my Tanganyika tanks, I use, Carib Sea cichlid sand. But everything that I do, I try to do it in a way that the fewer things that I have to try to remember when I'm changing water, or as I think of it, that the things that I don't want to forget to add, okay? That's my goal, okay? Maintenance-free water parameters. Dechlorinate it, and then I only have a couple tanks then that I have to worry about putting in some kind of buffer. Those are usually my African cichlids. So I'm kind of glad I did this early on, but I labeled my tanks, and all of my tanks have a label. The first number is the capacity of the tank. The second number is just the tank number itself. So I have 10 through like 10.1 through 10.7. It's just a really easy way for me to be able to monitor my tanks. After you watch all this, you monitor it, you need some place to put it. So I like to log everything that I do. And this is where I'm going to lose some of you, because this is a lot of work, okay? And when I mean it, this is kind of like getting a minor degree in Excel when you want to be a fish keeper. But I log it. So this is an example of my log. This is a 75-1. I also have a 75-2. But this log lets me keep track of everything, because with 16 tanks, I cannot remember everything that you've done, especially weeks or months ago. Very special activities, I keep track of it. So up here in L144 spawned. I didn't have the time that day or the next day, but as soon as I could, I went in there and I performed a full battery of testing all of my water or the parameters, okay? I have tried to get into the habit, whenever you have a success as well as a failure, test your water. Most people test their water whenever they have a failure. Dead fish, something doesn't seem right, oh, test your water. And what I have found is by testing my water, whenever I have a true success, I'm able to reproduce that easier down the road. And now I know what that pleco preferred to spawn in. I also keep track of anytime something does go bad in my tank, okay? It's not just important to keep track of what it was, but it's important to come up with why that happened, okay? In this particular, I had a couple guppies that were dead, but I knew they were old. It bothered me that they died, but I wasn't something that threw up an alarm bell for me that something had died in my tank. Now, at the end of next week, if I see 7 days in a row I had something dead and I did nothing, then that's on me, okay? So these are the things I keep track of. It makes things a lot easier. The first Excel spreadsheet, though, that I look at when I sit down to start working on this is one here that is my dashboard. Now, none of these green blocks, none of these cells are manually ran. I have I did special formatting that I did in Excel. So it tells me, like, if I logged in and I pulled up my dashboard right now, it would tell me my last water changes, they're all green. That means everything has been done within the last 7 days, okay? If it rolls and now half of these tomorrow, it's day 8, all of those cells would turn red, and that is how I know I've got to do a water change on there. Now, if I observe anything else in the that makes me want to do a water change, I'll do it. But you can see all the way to the far right. I even know last time I added eggshell. I keep track of my sponge filters, my hang-on backs, and whenever my floss and everything gets cleaned and replaced. These are things that just absolutely make it easier for me. It's a lot of extra work initially, but once I got used to doing this, it is so fast now. I don't even have to think about like what tank I did. I'm like, that was 29-3. Like in my mind, I just know which tanks are where because I've been to them so much. And every tank has the log page, and then this here is my dashboard. I use this space over here to add extra information, things that I need to highlight. It might be something that fish I'm about to get and I need to find a home for them, something I'm going to be moving on, but that's where I keep track of that. I also keep this little key. I keep this pretty active or accurate. So like the monitor, if I saw something, I looked and I observed a fish that I didn't think was acting fishy, or I thought it looked a little bit suspicious, I would automatically make the name of it right here, this cell here, I would turn it red, just to remind me tomorrow or this evening when I come in and look at it again, check that tank and make sure something isn't going wrong. Again, it's a lot of work, but with 16 tanks, I found this to be the absolute easiest way to not only not miss water changes, but it allows me over here to have multiple species in the same tank that are compatible. Last year, just for the BAP, I spawned and turned in, I think it was 21 different species out of 16 tanks. One of the things I want you to notice is the cells that have the yellow, those are tanks I don't have any points in because those are fish I decided to keep right now simply because I like them. I mean, a Brichardi tank, I can't put anything else in there with it. It's a 75-gallon aquarium that I do not have to grow out anything in, but I like those fish so much right now. So you have to, by doing this, you can have multiple fish and you have to kind of figure out what goes together. For example, if you have a live bear, well, fine, you can throw in if you're breeding guppies or mollies or endlers, you can throw those in a tank with bristlenose or a different ancestris, or if you're growing out, like for example, I'm growing out L260 Queen Arabesque, but I also have Gambusia fry in there. They're completely compatible, but you've got to be completely comfortable in moving fish around, sometimes every couple weeks if you have to. My goal is to keep them in the same tank as long as possible, but every once in a while, you're just going to have to mix it up a little bit just to make sure that you can have fish that are growing out with maybe even something that's breeding. So once you've done all that, you've quarantined and you've got your pairs and you're keeping track of everything and you're providing the best water parameters you can, hopefully you have fry. And the easiest and absolute best, if you can have this every time, this is the greatest, your parents raise the fry for you. Okay, it's free. If you have parents that are going to raise the fry for you, please go get them some live food and reward them because they are saving you so much time and effort of taking care of the babies. Okay, so my favorite thing to do with most eggs or fry that I get out is to move them to a breeder box. Even if the parents took care of them, eventually I know most parents will eat their babies. Okay. If I have a 10-gallon tank and I have a lot of fry, I will move them, but sometimes I just don't. So they just go straight to the breeder box. Grow out tank is great. A few occasions I've had the opportunity to divide my tank up. So I've had, say, a 20 long, and then you just have to think about, do you have fish that are going to provide parental care or no parental care? If it's parental care, then the divider that you can use can be something that actually allows water flow to go through it. If the parents do not provide parental care, now you're looking at using, I usually use sponge. a big piece of sponge, kind of like you would use for a hamburger mat, and filter in the middle of the tank, babies on one side, parents on the other. For breeding, I think it's really important to, I'm sorry, let me back. For removing the fry from the tank, some fry will go to the top, some fry will go to the bottom. For the ones that go to the bottom, my number one way to remove them is simply using a siphon hose. It's quick, it's easy. I've had a very low mortality. When I first started using it, I had one or two here and there that you would kind of botch up and maybe hurt them. But generally speaking, the siphon is about as safe as you can get. If they're top, then I use the medium Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee cup. Seems to be about the perfect size. A red Solo cup will work too, but I generally use, I drink a lot of Dunkin' Donuts. So I use a lot of medium Dunkin' Donut coffee cups in the house here for this. The plastic see-through ones. The see-through ones are nice because once you get the fish, you can tell if they're in there or not. The net is the last resort for me for getting fish out of my tank because they're fast. No matter, even when they're small, they're fast. And I've had more bad mishaps with fish in a net than I have any other method in trying to remove them. As far as feeding the fry and getting them to grow, it's important to get them on microorganisms and infusoria as fast as possible. And this is why I like having oak leaves in many of my tanks. For example, a little while ago, I had some unexpected Cory babies, and I put them in the breeder box. I removed oak leaves from a completely established tank that were fairly broken down and put them in the breeder box, and they automatically now have microorganisms to graze on. Okay. I said the majority of my tanks, I try to always have some kind of substrate, and this is why. Even though I'm using a breeder box, I will still take a scoop of that sand and put it on the bottom of the breeder box because there are microorganisms on that sand, and the babies are going to want to graze on that. After that, I move them to vinegar eels, microworms, and baby brine shrimp. I do use ceramicrine and New Life Spectrum, but my favorite is my home brew. And what I use for that is I have a mortar and pestle, and I don't like the idea. I hear people talking about, I've got to work with the fry. I've got to get them to, they're not taking adult food yet. Okay, I got to transition them over. There's no reason for that. If you start them on the same food you're going to feed them as an adult when they're a baby, really fine powdered, okay, you'll never have that problem. So whatever I feed the parents, I get the mortar and pestle, I smash it up into really fine powder, and that's what I feed my fry. The feeding of fry is absolutely important. I try to feed them twice, maybe 3 times a day, but it's also why it's important to have the leaves and the substrate and other things that you can have in there that's housing or holding on to the microorganisms. Prepared foods are going to deteriorate faster. So even if it's my home brew or if it's the ceramicron, you put it in the tank. Once you put it in there, if the fish didn't eat it, it's already going to start to mess with your water parameters. And this is why I like live foods before I have the, okay, this is why I like live foods rather than just using the powder, okay? Overfeeding is manually intensive, okay? And I really try not to overfeed my fry. It's manually intensive for me because everything in my fish room is manual. I have no auto water changing, no auto fill, anything like that. So if I overfeed and my water is kind of deteriorated, then I have to do additional water changes. And I don't like carrying buckets, even though I try to use a Python instead. Paul, don't haul. I do not like carrying buckets. I don't have the time for it. Here's some of the equipment that I found that was really helpful. And okay, the test kit, I think you really need it if you want to breed. You need to make sure that your cycle doesn't crash, or you want to know what the parameters are to make sure that you're providing the correct water for whatever species. Breeding caves. The one that I go to the most is Pleco Ceramics. The reason why I go to it the most is because I have provided multiple shapes for different species, and this is this one right here, that allows me to have, I've had cichlid spawn in it, I've had Plecostomus spawn in it, I've had just so many different species that will happily go in there and spawn. My second choice is these the water spikes. I use those a lot. This is a mortar and pestle that I use for the grinding my powder. The way that I feed my my fish, I usually use either a small paintbrush or coffee stirrers, like the wooden ones that you'd walk out, you know, stirring up your to-go order. I like the paintbrush and the stirrers because I can provide them just a little bit of food rather than trying to guess and overfeeding them. The digital thermometer is nice. The majority of my tanks are in one room. I can sit in my office chair and real quick zap each of my tanks and make sure everybody's sitting where they want to be. This one here seems kind of crazy, but this one here seemed to be a really good time saver. And this is prime, and I simply put it in a dropper. I think it was some kind of like it was for eye drops or something like that, for allergy season or something. And it was an empty bottle. And I love that because if I'm mixing brine shrimp and I just need a couple drops of prime, it's right there. I don't have to go get the big bottle. I don't have to mess with it. But that water, or the eye drop bottle, really comes in handy. I did have to add a dehumidifier to the house because of having this many tanks. So keep that in mind. If you're going to expand the number of tanks you have, the humidity is going to shoot up. I use a turkey baster. I do use that to just flush debris off of stuff. I've actually used it to individually pull fry out of very difficult places in the tank. So I use that. I use the hang-on specimen container. That's just a really nice thing to have. But this right here, I use this a lot. It is just a drywall mixing tub. I got it at one of the large box stores. I think it was Lowe's. It's like $6, but it is so useful in the fish room when you're doing maintenance, because it's like 20 or 30 inches long. So you can fit a Hamburg Matten filter. You can fit everything. Like if you got to take something out of the tank, you can put it in there without just messing up the floor. So this is why I say having the right tool for the right job is important. So this is a super red bristlenose pleco that spawned in a round breeding cave. And you can see he was a very young one when he spawned, but he was very happy in there, and it worked out very well. It was easy for him to defend. And when it was time, when I decided I wanted to pull the eggs, all I had to do was pull the whole cave out, and it was easy. I slipped the entire cave into the breeder box, and that's where they were born, or where they hatched, okay? On the right is a terracotta pot. I was doing some maintenance on a tank, and I didn't think about it, but I moved a brown bristlenose from one tank and a brown female from another tank, and I put them in I was working on multiple tanks, and when I came back a little while later, they had spawned in the pot. So you can see how difficult it is for a fish to defend their eggs if it's something as big as this. One of the things that I absolutely do not use, just no, don't use the nets. I hate them. I have tried them before. I have seen my fish fry literally get sucked through the bottom of this because they decide to rest on the bottom. And I have seen adult fish actually just suck them right through the bottom. So they're worthless to me. The Mac Daddy, though, is the Marina Breeder box. And this is what one looks like when it's on a tank and it's actually working. These are Julidochromis transcriptus fry in there right now. Actually, they're juveniles now. They're getting ready to to be put up on Craigslist and sold. But this is what it looks like from the other side. And you can see the water gets pulled up the tube, gets dropped in here, and it pours back into the tank. The only modification that I really do to the box is right here. I add a little sponge where the water comes back out, and that keeps the fry from being inadvertently going from the breeder box into the main tank and getting eaten. One of the things that you will have to do is clean that sponge every once in a while, because as you feed the fish, it will collect the powdered food. And if it gets too dirty, you could actually overrun the breeder box and it would go out on the floor. So the breeder box, you're going to have to choose if you want medium versus large. My preferred size is the large, larger water volume. But many of my 10-gallon tanks are lengthwise on my rack, and a large one will not fit. So a medium will fit perfectly on the end of a 10-gallon aquarium. So I use my mediums for that. The larges work great on the 20 longs. You can fit 2 large and 1 medium on 1 tank. And that is great when you have fish, like when I had the Lamprologus ocellatus, the little gold Aussies, and I had so many of them, I was able to move them based on hatch dates. And every 3 months, the box on the right, it was time for them to be moved out of the house. And it just worked out really great. It keeps the water parameters the same as the main tank. If you want to do a water change, you can do a water change as you normally would on the larger tank. If you want to do a 50%, a 75%, whatever you were going to do on that tank, you can do it. The breeder box, it just works out beautiful. I try to think of my breeder boxes as just a really small aquarium with a really large sump. So if you think about the large breeder box as a half-gallon aquarium with a 29-gallon sump, that's exactly what it is. I do add substrate or leaves. Provides the microorganism, the beneficial bacteria, but most importantly, it gives the fish a bottom. They need to know what is up and down. If you just put them in there and there's nothing on the bottom of it, you're going to see a bunch of really scared fish because they don't know. They have light coming at them from 360 degrees. I have tried painting the bottom of a couple of them, and that works out well. The downside is there are some fish that you kind of want to see from the bottom. Sometimes the Plecostomus, you want to just be able to move the sand, and you can see them from the bottom, and it's kind of neat. I try to cover my eggs. If I'm hatching eggs manually in the breeder box, I treat everything as though they're light sensitive, and I put a towel over them. Behind them, I'll put maybe a piece of paper or something between the aquarium and the breeder box just to keep light from coming in from that direction. Put a towel over them until they hatch. And I do that with just about everything, and I think it really helps prevent when they get the bacteria on them and what we call fungusing up. Please, for the love of God, stop trying to put pregnant fish in breeder boxes. You're just stressing them out. I see this all the time. People want to put their pregnant guppy or their molly or something in there, and she just freaks out, and it is just not fun to watch. I've seen people where they tried to put 2, like a pistogramma, in there because it was the breeder box and they wanted them to breed. It doesn't work that way. The only thing I use breeder boxes for is to isolate the fry. That's it. Okay. You can control how much water flow is coming in that the uplift tube in the breeder box. That is basically going to come down to how much aggravation you can tolerate, because they do make a gurgling sound. And when you have 5, 6, 7 of these breeder boxes in one room, it can get annoying. So crank it up as high as you can until you're annoyed. The more flow, the better. And the last thing to really keep in mind with the breeder box is it is going to slow the growth of your fry. I have tried this in numerous tests where I have taken half of the fry. Let's see, I've done it several ways. Let's see, the one I want to talk about is I did a third of the fry I did in like a 10-gallon grow-out tank. A third of them I left with the parents. A third of them I put in the breeder box. The ones that were with the parents, believe it or not, grew out a little bit better than the ones that were without the parents. So the ones that were in the breeder box, they were the runts of all of them. Okay, it just slows down their growth. So it's just something to keep in mind. The sooner and faster you can get them out of a breeder box, the better off you're going to be. So I said in the description of this that I would talk about some of my losses, because not everything is about the great fish that you got to breed and turn in for points and everybody's excited that you got to do it and everybody wants a pair or something like that. A couple things that kind of did not go well for me last year is I learned that nets kill fry. And that's what we were talking about in there, where I killed numerous fry trying to get them out with a net. I've had, in the process of moving fish around, I've had fish jump out of buckets because dummy me wasn't smart enough to put a towel or something over the top of it while I went to lunch, and I come back and find a dry fish. This one here is probably the pinnacle of stupid in my fish room. As my wife came in and we stood here talking, I simply let my python overfill my 29-gallon tank. And till the point we were standing there and finally said, "What is that sound?" And we realized I now had to spend the next couple hours of sopping up the entire wet carpet because I overflowed the tank. I ran out of tank space. And I thought, well, you know, these angelfish fry aren't that old. I'm going to throw in these other angelfish fry in there. And they ate, the ones that were like 2 weeks older, ate every single of the new baby fry that I put in there. So they are predators from an early age, but I lost an entire batch of fry because I thought I would be able to do that. One of my quarantine tanks, I had to do something real quick. I picked it up. I thought, well, I'm just going to set it on top of a plastic bucket. And the plastic on plastic got slippery, and the entire 5-gallon bucket, I see somebody shaking their head, the entire bucket fell to the floor. And I had the entire thing on a carpeted floor. So I had to spend hours. I had to buy an extra fan. I had to do all that. So, and the last one that is kind of embarrassing, but I pulled a bunch of floating plants out, and then later when I went to get rid of them, I found a dead fish in the bucket. So that's kind of a sad, but I want you to understand, I shared these with you because I want you to understand, no matter how great you spawn the fish, no matter what you do for them, no matter how excited you are, you're just going to do some silly, stupid stuff. And I want you to understand, these are just the 5 or 6 things that I was willing to share with you. There is a load of stupid things that I've done over the last year. So just kind of some follow-up and advice tips. I'm just going to go right to the first one. Keep your hands out of the tank, okay? You see yourself as the fish keeper that really wants to protect and take care of these fish. You're not going to let anything hurt them. They're your babies. You love them. You are nothing more than King Kong to them. All they see is this giant hand coming down that may be a predator that's about to just pull them out of the water and eat them. Okay, they don't want, keep your hands out of the tank. The less, especially with breeding pairs, if you want them to breed, let them breed. Put them in there, do your water change, get in, get out as fast as you can. Stop messing with them. I learned that I changed the water usually in this order. I start with my fry tanks. They need the best water quality. They're sensitive. Okay, start there. Then I change my smallest tanks because the smaller tanks has the possibility of the water going foul much faster than, say, a 75-gallon aquarium. Okay. Then I look at the highest density. For example, a 10-gallon aquarium with way too many L144 bristlenose. If I were to do it all over again, setting up my fish room, the thing that I would do different is I would add more small tanks than large tanks, because what I end up in the process, or the problem I end up with is I have more fry than I know what to do with, or I have pairs that I need to break up. And it's great that you have a 29-gallon aquarium, but in that same space, I could have 3 10-gallon aquariums, and I could have a 10-gallon of fry and 2 pairs, or a pair in each 10-gallon. So I would probably go with additional smaller tanks. So I want you to understand, it's not about the difficult a species is to breed. Breeding is so much fun. For me, it really is. I just like watching the fry. I like watching, to me, the pinnacle of it is a pair of fish that actually take care of their babies and lead them around, and you get to watch them. You get to watch them grow and how the parents protect them. And one of I'm sure, and Gerald, when we get to the Q&A, if you could correct me, or Neil or Thomas, somebody, I'm sure there's a better name for it, but I love it when the adults pin the fry to the bottom. And what happens is you walk up on the tank and the tank is startled, and you can watch it, and the parents will move their fins a certain way, and you will see every one of the fry become completely motionless where they're at. Mom and dad will go and investigate. They'll come back. They'll do something and release them, and the fry come back out of their suspension where they're just motionless. And it's just the neatest thing. Last year, I bred a couple fish that really were not of interest to me. They were fish that came upon me that I had a chance to get some points, and I got the pairs. And they're some of the toughest fish, the more aggravating, because if you didn't want them in the first place, deep in the back of your mind, all you're thinking is, man, you were taking away fish space for a fish I really wanted. Okay, if it doesn't interest you, just don't bring it in your fish room, because you're not going to give it the love it needs. And just breed for yourself, not the points. Just choose the fish that make you happy. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Just make yourself happy and the rest will come. So the thing is, I truly do. I try to keep all my tanks clean enough to be healthy and just dirty enough to be happy. And that's kind of the motto I go by in my fish room. And that is all I have. Thank you for staying awake.
Thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate it. So what we are going to do next is we're going to open up the floor for some Q&A, but first I want to pull from the Zoom chat some of our questions that showed up during Paul's talk. So, of course, my first question was, how much are you selling these spreadsheets for?
They're priceless, aren't they?
We want these formulas.
See, I would be happy to share them for a cup of coffee, Jamie.
All right.
I'm cheap. I'm pretty, no, there's really nothing to them. You really, you're going to have to figure out what information you think is most important to you. The examples that I gave is just kind of what I've developed over the last year.
So we had a question from Ryan Chan. He asked, do you add all the meds, and this was during your quarantine portion of your talk, do you add all of the meds on the same day?
I add them all at the same time, on the same day.
All right. So that is a yes. And we had a question about water quality that was answered in chat. And let's see. Anne-Marie asked if you'll take Tim Hortons. And if you've never had Tim Hortons, if you like Dunkin' Donuts, the answer is yes.
I'm sticking with Dunkin'. They know me there. Sometimes they have my drink ready by the time I get to the counter. So.
All right. Ryan Chan wants to know if you have a YouTube channel.
I do not have a YouTube. I do have the Instagram, which I'm starting to work on that. I've started working on a website, which is simply just fishmaniac.com. And I've been working on that to start getting some more written articles on things that I've experienced and fish that I've worked with. There's not a whole lot out there. I have a lot more that's in the works. I'm just right now about to finish up a article about spawning the ancestral species of catfish.
All right. Byron Russell says that he's trying to remove ick from his tank. I would give the personal recommendation of turning up the heat. I've had really good success with turning and cranking that heater and going above 82, 83 degrees.
Depending on the species, I would take it as high as they will let you. It's not really about what I want, it's about what the fish wants. And if the fish is able to tolerate 84 degrees, I'd knock it out to 84 degrees. Between heat and salt, those are my primary go-tos when it comes to treating almost everything. If you can't fix it with salt, I don't know what I'm going to do sometimes, because not being a medical professional, I don't know what half these medications do and don't do. So
I typed it in.
Can I make a comment real quick? It's about ick, because I've seen people post on Facebook as well, just say, oh, just crank up the temperature. Cranking up the temperature doesn't solve your ick problem. All it does is speed up the life cycle that it goes through. You still got to treat the parasite, it's a parasite, I think, right? Itself, and that's done in the free swimming stage, like with salt or something. So
ick
just
Right there.
right. So just cranking up the, but I've just seen people say, oh, just raise the temperature. I've had good luck with that. That's not sufficient.
it is absolutely, you're absolutely right. And that's why I can say I'm not embarrassed that this is so readily available, but I always keep this because, and I don't really use it in my regular tanks. This is mostly for quarantine. But ICX I have found has worked very well with the addition of raising the heat.
Yeah, I think the key is you have to understand the life cycle. You can treat it when the parasite is free swimming, but it doesn't do anything for the the cysts that are on the fish. So you've got to make sure that you treat it while the whole life cycle completes, so you get it all.
Well, I was under the impression, and from some of the articles I've read, is that the heat disrupts the life cycle.
The heat speeds up the life cycle. So Thomas is completely right. You have to kill it when it's in the free swimming stage. Okay, the heat, you can actually probably speed up the ick life cycle by at least a day and a half by increasing the temperature. And the faster you get them to the free swimming, the sooner you can kill them.
There's definitely some species that if you get the temperature high enough, if your fish are safe in the 90s, that it will stop them for the eggs from hatching. But I would say it doesn't work for all of them. So there's definitely different species of it. What I've done before, you trap the temperature and a UV filter. If you have a really good amount of it going through, the UV filter will pick up the free swimming stage and kill a lot of them that way too, on top of your medication.
You know, one thing, and yeah, I like that. And one of the things that I would add is probably the best things you can do is just continue doing your water changes. Even if you've got ick in your tank, do your water changes and maybe add 1 or 2 extras to the week. And that will really help, because if, just because some of the ick is actually on the fish, some of it is already in the free swimming. They're going to be at different stages in the tank at one time. So siphon it all out, raise the temperature, use some ICX, apply salt. All of these different things will work. You just have to find what works best for you.
Thing is, can the Karas and Garas take salt?
Don't insist at all.
But you can put that in there.
I didn't catch the question. What was
I wasn't able to see who that was asking the question. And you guys are all on mute, but if you press the space bar, it will unmute you so that you can ask a question.
Oh, okay. So you want to know if the Karas and Garas can take the salt.
I do not know if they can handle that.
Okay.
I have used salt with my electric blue Acaras with good effect. I had not had Garas, so I'm not sure on those guys.
That's what I'd be sensitive about the Garas there.
Cool.
All right.
So I have another question or comment. And this is great talk, by the way, Paul. There's just a boatload of really useful, practical stuff in there, and I agree with pretty much all of it. The one thing that I was surprised to hear you say was you use Dawn detergent, and you don't like to use bleach. I mean, I would reverse that. I think either works. The trick is if you don't get rid of the bleach before you put fish back in, bad news. If you don't get rid of all the soap, bad news, right?
I've never seen them put bleach on a duck and get the grease off of them. I have seen them put grease and Dawn on a duck and the duck waddle away. So I guess the thing I really like about the Dawn is it doesn't leave any residues or anything like that. And I mean, I do use bleach every once in a while, but it's very rare. I would prefer to let it sit out in the sun.
Yeah, no,
And the other reason why I don't use bleach is it actually will deteriorate the plastic and some of the other things that I'm using, and I just want them to last as long as I can.
yeah, that's all good stuff. The thing about, so the duck analogy, I don't know if it works, because I think with fish, the soap is not good for the slime coating.
I try not to wash them too much, but I also don't take them for walks that often either.
Yeah, but what I would also say is, like, bleach also breaks down pretty easily. You're most likely to have a problem if you do a quick treatment and then start filling it up with right away. Like if you leave it out for a day or whatever, you're going to take care of that. And I don't think soap goes away by itself, right? It has to be rinsed off. But I mean, as long as you rinse.
Let me specify. I don't use Dawn detergent on like sponge filters or something like that. I specifically use Dawn detergent. The place that I only really use the Dawn detergent is the tub. Okay.
Yeah.
I clean the tub out with that. I don't use the bleach in the tub because I don't really know how it's going to react or if it's going to absorb into the plastic. I don't want it to leach out. I don't know enough about bleach to worry about it or to use it in that way. But if I had to choose, I guess, between disinfecting and like a thermometer or a heater or something that might have been in the tank, I usually use hydrogen peroxide. That's my go-to, would be hydrogen peroxide, and then the Dawn is only for the tub.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've just used bleach a long time, and personally, it is cheap. You buy a big thing, it lasts forever. Hydrogen peroxide is more expensive, and you buy these little containers basically.
I use hydrogen peroxide around my tanks all the time. I use it I use it with hatching eggs. I use it with blackbeard algae if I had to. So I'm just more comfortable using hydrogen peroxide because its byproducts are harmless.
One of the
bleach.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
One of the things that you can do to buy affordable hydrogen peroxide is to buy clear liquid hair developer, which is 20% or 30% hydrogen peroxide, and you can dilute that, but you have to be comfortable with the process of dilution and the math, because if you screw up the math, then you're in big trouble. But you can buy one of those developer solutions for like $10 and make enough hydrogen peroxide, and you can make the hydrogen peroxide so that it's fresh, because a lot of times in those brown bottles, hydrogen peroxide is so light sensitive that it decomposes to oxygen and water very easily, which is one of the reasons that it's so aquarium safe. But you can use just a few drops of that hair developer in water and make yourself some 3% hydrogen peroxide for pretty cheap. Another thing that was brought up in chat that I felt was important enough that we should share it was from Caroline. She says, one of the things to remember if you're turning up your temperature in your tank for ick-related reasons, that you need to remember that the dissolved oxygen, the solubility of oxygen and all the other gases goes down as the temperature increases. So adding an air stone when you do that is recommended, because you're going to have less dissolved oxygen in your water. That's all I wanted to say.
And speaking of the heater, you mentioned the heater in the terracotta. You didn't have a picture. I'm thinking heaters are bigger than a terracotta. How do you kind of make that work?
I use several different types of heaters. Last year I got turned on to the preset ones that are just a 78. Those work out really great for quarantine tanks. They are considerably shorter than the ones that are adjustable. And so it actually fits almost perfectly inside of a larger terracotta pot. I've had some that the top portion of it sticks out of the terracotta pot, but as long as the heat coils are inside the terracotta pot, then you're fine.
So this heater you're talking about is it doesn't even have a thermostat on it. You basically just plug it in and it's always at 78 and that's all it does.
That's it. And I really like those simply because they're just set it and you just throw it in and forget about it. I mean, it's
yeah, you can send out a pointer to the I'd be interested in looking at one of those. I'm not familiar with them right off, but that sounds interesting.
Any other questions?
Yeah, could you speak a little bit about like breeding tetras in general, like cardinal tetras, neons, and rummy nose? How many like gallons of like water do you use, and how many numbers of fish, or like what's the setup look like?
For dealing, it's interesting. I've just started working with neon tetras. I'm hoping to get that by the end of the summer to get them to finally successfully breed or spawn. Essentially, it's about reducing the pH. So a combination of kind of like a tap water and RO, combination of that, and also using different organics on the bottom that are going to help lower the pH. But I haven't got them to successfully spawn yet. Okay, so for me, it's been 2 males to 4 females. Put them in there and see if you can get them to go. I was just starting to work with them, and then I had a chance to get some other fish I really wanted, and so I kind of kicked them out of their spawning tank so I could put these other fish in there. But it really comes down to having a media in the very bottom of it where the eggs are going to collect. Kind of so basically you would put the tetras in there. For me, that you put the neons in there in the morning when they spawn, and then after they're done, remove them and let the eggs and everything stay in the tank and develop in there.
So when people breed zebra danios, they use marbles on the bottom so the eggs can fall through and the neons or the fish can't get to them. Would you think marbles would be good, or maybe things like moss or like a spawning mop would also do the trick?
I've used the marbles before. The majority of the time I try to use some kind of like pea gravel or something like that, something a little bit natural, and the Java moss. As I've been watching the white clouds and the cherry barbs and stuff like that, I know it's not the same as tetras, but it's the same principle. They really enjoy going in and using the Java moss, and if you can have that over a nice bed of either marbles or of some kind of gravel, like pea gravel, something not real fine, but something, then I think you'd have good success.
If
So
people need, by the way, if people need Java moss, I've got more than I know what to do with, and I throw it out at times. Just, contact me offline, I guess. If people need it, or post a query, because the club has lots of it floating around. It's easy to grow, relatively speaking.
It's just slow growing.
Depends. It depends. It's a well.
You are the plant master, so
Well,
for
I'm
the
the
rest of
Java.
us, it's slow growing.
Yeah, it tends to fill up my tank to where like the fish can't move.
And those are the happiest fish.
Well, they are, but then you're like, there's nothing in the tank because you can't see anything. And then you pull it out and you're like, oh, wow, look what I found.
yeah, and when you trim it, the little moss goes everywhere, and it's just so hard to keep it to where you want it on a driftwood or something.
I gave up on that a long time ago. When I put plants in my tank, I like to put a lot of stuff that is like the Java ferns and the Anubias stuff that's attached to something that I can take out, so that way I can take it out easily and net out parents or siphon out fry or whatever I want to do. And so I just don't, I just really haven't got a lot into the plants. I really like the rhizome plants. Those are my favorite.
Paul, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah.
From Canada, maybe you can't. Hey, I was just curious what you like for antifungal for eggs.
What I like for what? Say the last part.
Antifungal.
I use hydrogen peroxide.
Okay.
And it's interesting that you asked that, because I do that in a breeder box on a tank while it's running. So if you were using hydrogen peroxide inside of your tank, I've seen it go up as high as 3 milliliters per gallon of tank water. Okay. So if you're in a 10-gallon aquarium, you could go up to easily 30 milliliters. Well, you don't need quite that many. So I'm not worried about it at all. So what I do is I usually have an idea of when the eggs are going to hatch. I mean, like, okay, well, this species is going to take 48 hours or something like that. So I'll try to hit it maybe twice, and I'll just put the hydrogen peroxide as needed directly in the breeder box.
Okay.
And then it'll just trickle out and just turn into, water and oxygen.
Interesting. Okay.
So I've used hydrogen peroxide before, and it's usually the 3% that you can get at the pharmacy. I would say anything above 2 mils per gallon. If you're at 3 mils, you're probably going to kill your moss if you have moss in there, or some of the more sensitive plants, as well as maybe things like autosynclus catfish. So I wouldn't go more than maybe 2 gallons or 2 mils per gallon.
Okay. I've got a whole, you're not going to be surprised by this, but yeah, I actually have a spreadsheet that has my calculations on that. And so I usually had based it on 3 milliliters per gallon, and I cut that in half. So on that 10-gallon aquarium where it was say 30 milliliters, to me, the max I would use on that, and if I was treating blackbeard algae or anything, the max I would use is 15 milliliters. So that ends up being below. That ends up being approximately 1.5 milliliters per gallon. The thing is, I really don't like using much in my aquarium when it comes to any kind of chemical or even medicines and stuff like that. I just don't know enough about the interaction of everything. And when it comes to whether it be treating fish or treating stuff like that, I don't think most of us really know what we're treating. We're kind of treating it like a general, I mean, it's a bacteria, but it could be one of God knows how many bacterias, or the virus, you know what I mean? So I really try to do a lot of prevention with quarantine, or I try to use stuff like hydrogen peroxide, which is natural when it breaks down, or salt. Those are the things that I try to use around the aquarium. Are there any other questions?
I got a couple other random things let's bring up. So the prime dropper that you suggested, I mean, I like that idea. But the issue I've had with something like that is it tends to crystallize if you don't keep it completely sealed properly or something. And so like I'll find like a month later I'll go by and it'll evaporate it out or stuff. And so I mean, I do the same thing, but I've like dilute it with some water and put it like in a squeegee jar. But I don't have a good idea then what the ratios are. But
you put the cap on it?
Yeah.
I mean, is that a 50-50 that you put the cap on it, or you always put, because I've been using that same eyedropper for over a year now, and I just refill it as needed. I put the cap on it secure when I'm done. I've never had the crystallization problem or anything. And I never mix it with anything with water, but it is very handy to have on the counter, because if you go to mix baby brine shrimp and you're doing like a 1.5 gallon, you only need a couple drops. Or if, let's say, like on the shrimp tank, and you're gonna, like, you just notice you just need to top it off because of evaporation. You just want to put a gallon in. I keep a 1 gallon milk jug that I'd cleaned out real well for stuff like that. Put a little bit in, and you're good to go.
And you're actually not even using prime. You're using the crystallized form and then mixing it up yourself, I believe, right?
No, I use both prime and safe. If I am mixing in an aquarium, or if I'm mixing in a bucket, then I'm going to use safe. If I am mixing just like 1 gallon to do a top off in a particular tank, or if I'm doing something like that I just need a small amount, then that's when I use prime. Because using the safe, the smallest way that I have to measure it is a 1/64 teaspoon, and that treats 19 gallons. So if you're putting it in, I mean, if you're doing like 1 gallon, I mean, you just like treated it.
It's hard to
it's
measure
ridiculous. Yeah. So that's why I use the prime, so I can do small calculations.
I guess one sort of final comment I have, I thought you were going to say, like, on your kind of lessons learned / you know, what I've done is the corollary there is don't have carpet in your fish room. That's just kind of a given.
Believe me, we have actually we've talked about it. We've talked about. I have been given the AOK to move into the garage and turn it into a complete fish room. I work, as everybody can see. I mean, I'm at my office desk right now. Okay, during the day, this is where I sit almost all day. I love having my fish here. I'm afraid if they were in the garage, I wouldn't get to observe so many things that I have. I've literally been on conference calls and sat here and watched German blue rams spawn. I've watched, you know, L144 Plecostomus spawn and play around and finally, you know, go into the cave and just. I mean, I've seen so much by just being in here. I'm afraid to put it out in the garage that I would miss it. This is my my safe place. So
I think you got it right. I think you're lucky to have the fish room there. I mean, I have an office without fish in it. I have a downstairs fish room, and I would have liked to spend a lot of the time on conference calls being able to look at fish. It would have been a win-win.
I do notice people's eyes drift sometimes over to, and I've actually had literally people ask me to move to one side or the other depending on which species I've had in the tanks, just so they can watch. So.
Yeah, when I have conference calls, a lot of times my coworker will call so she can hear the running water in the background if she doesn't get to see it.
Yeah, many of my conference calls have been started off with, so Paul, what has spawned this week? So, but actually from where I'm sitting right now, it almost looks like one large aquarium behind me, doesn't it? It kind of,
we know better.
Yeah, this is the 75 over here, and this is my 29 over here that is got an enormous, just a huge amount of albino crebensis fry, and they're all over there. It was a huge spawn.
To the aquarists here, we recognize that the tank on the left and tank on the right can't be the same because they just look different.
Well,
Definitely.
yeah, I mean, but I've had people that have thought that they're just like